Welcome back. In weeks 13 to 14 we're going to look at hardware, and in this lesson we're going to look at input devices. In this lesson we'll talk about what input is, look at a range of input devices and think about some of the issues to take into consideration when we're choosing the right input device. So what is input? Input to a computer system is the conversion of any sort of data into the digital electronic form that can be processed inside the computer. There are a range of different types of input, and you're probably familiar with all of these. As a user, you can input information into the computer by hand. This is called manual input, for example using the keyboard, the mouse or touch screen. It's possible to put images into the computer by scanning them or by using still or moving cameras. Other kinds of digital signals can be input to the computer, for example sound, and wireless signals can be received. And there are a range of input sensors which will detect factors in the environment such as temperature and input those digitally into the computer. So let's think about the different ways that data can be input to a computer system. In the case of manual data entry, a person uses an input device like a keyboard to enter the data by hand. In an automated system, the data has been prepared in a form such as a barcode that can be scanned and read automatically by equipment. And in the case of a sensor input, some sort of sensor picks up local environmental factors and inputs them in digital form. And to choose which one, we have to take into account the advantages and disadvantages of each. Let me just quickly review those. So in the case of manual data input, the input can be very varied and flexible. So a person can type in almost anything from the price of goods in a shop to a long novel or essay. But it's slow compared to an automated system. The automated system is much less trouble, it's much less stress and work, but the data has to be structured and prepared in a certain way. So a barcode can only store a certain kind of data. And sensors are kind of tireless and constantly on duty, and they can pick up environmental factors and feed them in day or night. Let's think of a burglar alarm or a sensor that you might take to the bottom of the ocean to detect the pressure. I want to talk briefly about QR codes. They do come up sometimes and you should be able to recognise them. A QR code is similar to a barcode, but it's more complex, and so it can store more complicated data, and you can get an app on your phone and scan in a barcode. Chip and pin might come up. We also call them smart cards. The card has a mini processor in it. ID cards, how we get into the college, for instance, how we pay for things with touchless entry. Quite often the data that we want to input into the computer is in analog form. An analog signal is one that varies continuously, such as temperature and sound waves. By vary continuously, we mean it doesn't suddenly jump from one digital value to another. So for instance, the temperature in a room won't suddenly jump from 18 to 19 degrees. Instead, it will smoothly and continuously increase by a very tiny amount over time until it reaches the new value. In order to convert this type of smooth analog signal or information into the digital number form inside the computer, what these devices do is sample it many times per second, and each sample is recorded as a separate digital value. The more often that analog signal is sampled, and the more accurately the level of the signal is recorded, the higher quality our input will be. And we can notice this, for instance, with music or with images or film, that if we store them at a higher quality, we get a better signal, but our file size is larger. So let's look at an example. A sound wave consists of changes in air pressure, and it's an analog signal. The air pressure is changing constantly. We can sample that air pressure many times per second, but however often we sample it, we won't perfectly capture the smoothness of real life sound. But if we capture it more often, we will get a better quality signal. So a DVD can record more frequent samples, and so we'll get better quality outputs. A completely different device that I'd like to briefly mention is an accelerometer. An accelerometer, there'll almost certainly one inside your phone, for example, measures acceleration. Now, acceleration isn't just speed, it's any change in velocity, direction of travel. So shaking your phone will be picked up by the accelerometer, or every time you take a step, that would be picked up by the accelerometer. There are an absolute ton of uses of an accelerometer, and I'm not going to read all these out. If you're interested, you could pause this and have a look at it, but detecting that you've shaken your phone, the way that a steady cam at the movies, they can move the camera about and it smooths out any shaking, earthquake detectors, a Fitbit. Anyway, you get the picture. There's an absolute load of uses of accelerometers in the modern world, and I have seen it come up a couple of times in the exam. And GPS, there's another interesting one. There are, as you probably know, a large number of GPS satellites in orbit around the Earth, and your smartphone or another GPS enabled device can pick up signals from those satellites. Because we know where those satellites are with great precision, and your phone can compare the signals from the different satellites. The phone or your TomTom on your car or whatever it is can work out where you are very accurately in this way. RFID is a radio frequency identification tag, and that's an implant. You can put it into a person or an animal or into an object. For instance, a shipment of something that was worth a lot of money, like a shipment of diamonds, could have an RFID tag inserted into it so that you can track exactly where it is. When you're asked a question about what the right input device to use is, you should think about as many different factors as you can that are relevant to the question. For instance, you must think about what type of data you want to input, how much money you want to spend, how much quality, how important quality is to you. Factors like weight or mobility might be important, and you might need to think about the advantages and disadvantages of using automated or manual input. It's hard to predict. You just need to know as many different features about input devices as you can think of and discuss it in an intelligent way if it comes up in the exam. So in this lesson, we've really ranged very widely over input devices, and I mentioned a few that I thought might particularly come up. You should be able to explain what input is and talk about a few different devices. and you might be asked a question about what the right input device is in a particular situation. There are so many different input devices, I can't possibly go through them all, but if you use your common sense, you should be able to express your understanding and get some well-earned marks in the exam. So there is a hardware workbook which my students have, and there's a section on input devices. So find that workbook on the VLE and fill in the section on input devices to show your understanding. And in the next lesson, we'll look at output devices. Bye for now.